They've yet to take the oath, yet to sit, but they aren't sitting around. Tax cuts, yes, but a renewed focus on the children at risk. The outlook for the state treasury and the private sector, and what role, if any, for Arkansans in a new White House. Arkansas Week, next.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
This is Arkansas Week.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. In Little Rock and in Washington, January is a lot closer than we imagine, perhaps. And the preparations in our capital, that's where we'll begin tonight. David Keith joins us from the UCA Journalism faculty. Steve Brawner, an independent journalist. Ernie Dumas, an independent also and columnist for Arkansas Times. Steve, we had both chambers in recent days of the General Assembly organized for the January session, and there were some hurt feelings.
Well,
usually are, but
it all started last week when the Democrats in the House, even though they have a tiny minority now, 26 members out of 100, managed to volunteer en masse for the Revenue and Tax Committee, which is going to be pretty important in the next session. That will, at least supposedly, that's where Governor Hutchinson's tax cut may go through, or the other tax cuts. And Republicans were caught a little bit off guard by that, and so they were determined not to make the same mistake in the Senate. And so this week, the Senate Republicans pushed through a measure where every committee has to have at least 5 members of the majority party out of 8, guaranteeing them a majority. Not all the Democrats were happy about this, but there's only 9 of them out of 35. So not much they can do. So that's what, right now, we'll just wait and see what kind of, how they respond to that. But yeah, there was some unhappiness about it.
well, inevitable.
Well, it is, and there's always every legislative session. There's always that tension every 2 years, the tension of committee assignments, because committee assignments are very important for individual legislators. You'd like to be on the Insurance and Commerce Committee. That's where all the legislation comes through, where all the lobbyists, rich lobbyists are, and so everybody would like to be on the Insurance and Commerce Committee. Not many people really want to be on the Revenue and Taxation Committee. It's not a very popular committee. And that's where the Democrats decided they would focus their attention, and so they've stacked it so that they could control they I think, 11 out of the 20 on the House Revenue and Taxation Committee, which gives them a numerical majority, but not necessarily a controlling majority, because these Democrats, unlike Republicans, stray. And some of them are very conservative, more conservative than Republicans. So that's not a guarantee that they'll be able to control things. Also, and you're right. The governor's got a tax cut he's going to propose that would lower the income taxes, or some tax, by about $50 million. What's kicking in fiscal year 2019, but I think it's probably not going to make too much difference. They'll have a majority that they can exercise, a significant majority in the House, if they can pull a bill out of the committee. If Democrats on the committee were to stymie the governor's tax bill, technically they could do that. They could, by supermajority, pull a bill out. I think that's not likely to happen. Legislators do not want to vote against a tax cut or for a tax cut. So I think the likelihood is that bill, whatever bill that the governor wants, will come out of that committee regardless, even though with 11 Democrats on that committee. He's going to get his way on that. And the other thing about the committee is, one importance of committees is it's also a place to kill bills that legislators do not want to vote on. There will be some bills there, tax cut bills, that a lot of legislators feel like they cannot vote against if it's on the floor. They do not want to vote against a tax cut for veterans, for example. But they may feel like, well, we can't stand the loss of this revenue. So you expect the Revenue and Taxation Committee to be the bad guys.
Fade the heat.
Fade the heat, and that happens every legislative session. A committee will fade the heat, bury bills that legislators do not want to vote on because they would feel like they would have to vote for it. So it serves that purpose as well. But I think it's going to work itself out, and the governor will get his way.
Yeah, and it's what the Democrats did in the House is they followed the rules of the House. The committee assignments
Didn't do anything illegal.
No, it's based on seniority, and they took advantage of the seniority that they had to build this. And of course, Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin said that they were, I don't forget his exact words, but he wasn't very happy about it.
He was horrified by it, but the governor didn't seem to care at all.
Yeah,
and
the process.
Speaker of the House
I think
didn't seem to care.
Like Ernie said, and yes, committees are everything, and committee makeup and what goes on in the committees is a large portion of what produces the results in the legislature. So on the Senate side, it was reacting to what happened in the House. And I think it is an example of certainly the Republicans taking advantage of the large majority that they have in the Senate so they could push this through and guarantee their majority on all committees. And so does that give them an advantage? Certainly it does, but it doesn't mean, as Ernie was pointing out, that 100% of the Republican legislative offerings are going to get out of committee and make it to the floor and be adopted.
We probably ought to note as well the crucial role of the Speaker in designating which legislation goes to which committee. If it's a particularly strong, a Speaker, but especially a strong Speaker, one who has the confidence of the body, the majority of the body, can make a strategic decision, a very strategic decision on which committee will hear a certain piece of legislation. At least, Ernie, my member, Steve, David, my member, at least it seems once per session, the Speaker makes somebody very angry by sending a bill that he does not particularly care for, or that perhaps the governor doesn't particularly care for, and assigning it to a hostile committee.
That always happens.
And not only that, the Speaker also names the chairman of the committee, which has a lot of sway too. So.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Right, and on the other side of that, the Speaker can put that bill into a very favorable committee and make some people happy. It certainly can, bills that, depending on what it will do, it can go to a variety of committee. And like you said, that is the Speaker's prerogative. And so, yeah, that is a lot of power that is in his hands.
We should note, too, that we have now returned to a one-party state. There's one-party rule in Arkansas. That's in the old days, for 100 and something years, it was a Democratic Party, and now it's the Democratic Party for the last couple of years, and for as far into the future, I think we can see Republican Party rule in Arkansas. Even though they do not have the 3/4 majority, which would be the ultimate, because with a 3/4 majority, the minority party cannot block appropriation bills or anything else. So they're one vote short, I think, in both the House and the Senate of having a clear 3/4 majority in both the House and the Senate, which would give them total control, and the Democrats would have no authority, no power at any rate to affect the course of any kind of legislation.
But once you have one-party rule, in effect, you have no-party rule, and a lot of times.
That's true.
And so what can happen now, this does not mean that Democrats are powerless as individuals. The Senate especially, and also the House, is very much based on collegiality. And while it will be hard for Democrats as a group to push through legislation that they would like, that Republicans would not support, they can still get a lot done. They just really can't do it as a group. A well-liked Democratic legislator can probably be a lot more successful than a disliked Republican legislator. In fact, Larry Teague of Nashville, who everybody likes, was once again named chairman of the Joint Budget Committee. And that's a very powerful position. He's a Democrat, and yet he was given this position, and he has a lot of influence in that where he is, even though he's a Democrat.
Well, aside from just party identification, and Ernie noted this earlier, if not ideology, at least philosophy enters into this as well. You may be a very, very conservative Democrat and be completely simpatico with the Republican majority, say, on fiscal policy or social policy, sir.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, and I think in Arkansas, even when it was Democrat controlled, it was still a very conservative Democrat control. And
it wasn't the Minnesota legislature.
And so Arkansas has always been basically a conservative state. Yeah. And I believe a lot of people who have been elected as Republicans, if they were running 30 years ago, they would have been running as Democrats and being elected. So it's not, there's been some shift in politics, and I think some of it is a result of what has happened at the federal level, but are the people in the legislature that much philosophically, ideologically different from the ones who were there 30 years ago when the Democrats were in charge? Not a great deal.
As Steve said, one party rule turns into actually no party rule, and that's what we had in Arkansas all those years. The Democratic Party was just, that was the only party. The Republican Party was just a shadow. Nobody considered it. So you just had the ins and the outs, the liberals and the conservatives, the mountain states, mountain counties versus the rural counties versus Little Rock. Those were the things, the way that they broke out, and not Republicans and Democrats. I don't know whether we'll return totally to that era or not, but that's the way it was. We're going to see now that there are some ideological battles shaping up immediately, and that is over ethics. For example, I think one of the big battles of the session will be over ethics bills introduced this week by Democrats that would try to control dark money in politics and set limits on contributions and so forth, and limit the number of committees, PACs that a legislator could have. That may break out into a party struggle, in which case the Republicans will win.
Okay, in terms of budget, we're still putting together a budget, Steve. The administration has put its shoulder behind, a significant amount of additional money for DHS to look after kids.
Right.
Foster kids especially.
As Cindy Gillespie, Director of the Department of Human Services, said this week, the state's foster care system is, as she said, I quote, truly in a crisis. The number has grown 30% in the past maybe year.
Yeah, year and a half.
From 4,000 a few years ago to 5,300, around there now. The reason is, or what's happening is that there is an increase in students and children coming into the system, but the real problem is that there are fewer going out. And DHS is saying that is because they don't have enough caseworkers. They've lost 100 since about 2010, and because of that, the caseworkers don't have enough time to help families reunify. The average caseworker has 28 children under their care, under their watch. The national standard is 15. And so because of that, Governor Hutchinson has, has proposed an extra $26 million in the next fiscal year, and then more the next year, to try to hire about 228 staff members for DCFS, Division of Children and Family Services, and of that 150 would be caseworkers.
And some of the other factors here is because of this high rate of turnover that, the number of cases that these caseworkers are having, they're getting tremendous amounts of overtime or, working around the clock. They're getting burned out and they are...
Emotional stresses.
Right, sure, and you can understand the stresses that would come with that job. So the ones who are there have very little experience. I believe the average tenure for one of these caseworkers now is slightly over a year on the job, and so they don't have the institutional knowledge that you get being in a job for a long time. And Ms. Gillespie said that one of their goals is to work on retention as well. I mean, obviously the focus is on the children, but if you have more experience, which means more training and everything else with these caseworkers and other people involved in the system, then they're going to be able to make better decisions, quicker decisions, and move things along more quickly. And of course, they're also looking at steps they can take to try to keep children out of the system if they don't need to be in the system, whether that is leaving them, making adjustments so that they can remain with their own family or even with relatives. That's an area where the foster children system has been lagging behind national numbers in Arkansas. The percentage of children who need to go into who need to be removed from the home, and there is an option of a family member or a relative who can provide the care that is necessary for this child. But and it's something that Arkansas has improved on, but it wants to continue to do that as well, so they can keep these children in a family unit, people that they know, and not put them into the foster care system where, like Steve said, they're going in there and they're not coming out, and a lot of it has to do because of the caseload and the caseworkers who are not able to keep up with all of the children under their charge.
DHS, Ernie.
Well, the Children's Protective Services has been in crisis, as you know, Steve, and you and I, we've been around many, many years. It's been in crisis for decades, and it seems to, and it rises and falls. We've had lawsuits about Children's Protective Services in the past. And now it just seems like almost weekly, or at least every 3 or 4 months, we have some incident that focuses attention on that. Last week it was the conviction of a man in Northwest Arkansas for murdering, along with his wife, murdering his son in a brutal sort of way.
The wife has not stood trial.
She has
yet.
not stood trial yet. Her trial comes, and he's been sentenced, gotten the death penalty. And the background shows that there have been complaints against the family, and the Division of the Protective Services had looked at it and said, well, there's nothing here. So there's always criticism of human services, in particular the children's programs. And so they are beginning to address it, I think, in a serious way. The governor's going to put, he's already jacked up the appropriation for DHS. He's going to do it again next year and the following year. So, and with a budget that's already in crisis, I think. So we're going to see some strains there, I think, in this session.
Well, along those lines, I plead guilty to doing a bit of reporting this past week and discovered that nestled in the state police budget request, it's there, but in the state police budget request, there is a request for an additional $1.5 million upfront money for the State Police Crimes Against Children unit, which is involved in obviously criminal, horrific incidents such as the one that came from Benton County. That unit takes 63,000 calls a year on a 24/7 basis. Sometimes it takes as long, I am told, the commander of that unit said, sometimes it takes 30 to 40 minutes. A caller, a mandated reporter, a doctor, a teacher, a social worker, sometimes is on hold for 30 to 40 minutes waiting for an operator. And the term operator doesn't really capture it. It's not a PBX operator. It's basically these operators are trained intake employees. They screen the calls, they get down the basics and stuff like that, and they're swamped. Mm-hmm. So the agency is requesting another 10 investigators, 63 at present, and they average about 15 new cases on a rolling basis each. It makes it very difficult to manage that job. Anyway, in terms of the state's economic outlook, we got a report Friday morning that unemployment in September held steady at 4. So take that as good news and hope it continues.
Well, it is good news, and it's good news nationally and in Arkansas. It's
trending down.
It's trending down. It looks like they've about taken all the slack out of the job market. So probably first week of December, the Federal Reserve is going to raise federal funds rate for the first time, short-term federal fund rate for the first time since when? Way back.
Oh my gosh!
How many years ago? And the assumption is now there's not much slack in the job market anyway, so you're free to. You need to go ahead and raise the interest rates to check the prospect of inflation. So we'll have that going, and we'll see how that fares with the new president. But anyway, it's a good sign that they're going to do that, I think.
Yeah.
Of course.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Steve. No. Well, I mean, it just points to it's very gradual, very slow, but just a continued economic recovery. The numbers continue to come in on the positive side, and when it comes to economic growth. And it looks like right now, economists, who are such they're so definitive in what they say, but
Dismal signs.
yeah, but they are. It's unless something is just completely unexpected happen, they don't see this. They see the rate hike will come out of the Fed for sure.
And one thing the state economic forecaster, Dr. Michael Packo, reported this week, Arkansas's super duper unemployment rate, which has been 3.9%, 4%, better than the rest of the country. He has some questions about that. He thinks that there's some months that kind of just look a little bit not right, just kind of outlier numbers in the early part of the year, and suspects that those numbers may come up a little bit. That we're not quite doing a good job of counting those who've dropped out of the labor force and in the unemployment rate. But not to say that he was trying to say that it was all doom and gloom. It's still good, but there has been. It may not be quite as great as it seems to have been. Also, he reported that Arkansas went through a double-dip recession in 2012 or 13, that we actually had 3 quarters of negative growth there, and we went back in recession very briefly.
On to the other capital. It appears on Friday morning that fairly certain that Leslie Rutledge will remain the Attorney General of Arkansas, but not the U.S. Anyway, General Rutledge was in New York this past Thursday, I think, Wednesday, Thursday, visiting Trump Tower. Caused a bit of a stir, but there are some other Arkansas names being kicked around as well.
Well, she's being talked about. I mean, she's not going to be Attorney General, but there is, that one thing was EPA Administrator was thrown out there, and she's definitely not trying to tamp down the talk that she's may have something, but she also is said that she's also running for re-election. So we'll see. Then Senator Cotton has been talked about as a Secretary of Defense. And one of the other main rivals, would be Senator Jeff Sessions, he's the next Attorney General, so that would clear the way. Senator Cotton was asked about this on Talk Business yesterday, did not say that he would not accept anything. So we'll see. But there's a lot of talk right now. The media is speculating, and so how much of that is being driven by leaks and plants, and how much of that is just because we're talking to each other? Who knows?
Yeah, I think with Attorney General Rutledge, she was obviously very nationally vocal in her support of Donald Trump during the campaign. Made the rounds on the various cable networks, speaking on his behalf. I thought she was just trying to position herself for a job on Trump TV at some point in the future. But Donald Trump has at least, and there have been really very few appointments made at this point, but there's at least the indications that he is going to be loyal to those who are loyal to him.
Well, it works that way.
It does, and which is politics as usual, no matter how much you drain the swamp. But Attorney General Rutledge was loyal, and so I think if she is interested, and there's a place for her, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see her somewhere, whether EPA or somewhere else within the federal government.
Well, one of the things that always happens in these transitions is that one of the objectives of the incoming president is to tout as many people as you can, and so that all kind of people in every state get mentioned for this or that, and it's good for all of those people back in the state to say they're being considered for some cabinet position or something else on the president's staff. So it's good for Leslie Rutledge, it's good for Tom Cotton, and all the other. And Mike Huckabee, we should mention that Breitbart News ought to know, since they're now their executive is now the first man under the president. The president's the closest person to the president, Steve Bannon. And it reported yesterday or today that Mike Huckabee is going to be the ambassador to Israel. which kind of makes sense. And so
He's been there.
He's been there, and he makes a pilgrimage there every year. So
Knows his way around.
he knows his way around. And he's a favorite of the right wing in Israel.
Although Huckabee's name also has been mentioned, like with Health and Human Services, in connection with that cabinet level position. So, and like Ernie said, names certainly get floated around at this time period following a presidential election.
Where's this thing headed? I mean, we keep reading, about the confusion, the upheaval, the infighting. Not terribly atypical, I don't think, at the start of a new administration. I mean, it gets a lot of headlines, I think, or as much as it does because President-elect is Mr. Trump.
Well, I think that's part of it. It's not, like you said, not atypical. As people are jockeying for positions, people may have a preferred position, and so they're trying to line themselves up with that. And I think part of it goes back to what Steve said. So much of this is going on behind closed doors. How much of it is just speculation, media speculation? The Trump people say we've got no more infighting than you would expect in a situation like this, while there are some people who have been, I would say, cast out of the transition process. Well, they're saying things are a whole lot worse than they are, but is that just a matter of sour grapes because they're not part of the party anymore?
Yeah.
The big one, I guess, was Chris Christie, the ouster of Chris Christie. By, I guess, Jared Kushner, the new president's son-in-law, who apparently is mad because Chris Christie, when he was a U.S. attorney in New York, convicted Kushner's father. So
right.
He did not want Chris Christie having any role, and so he was ousted. That's the one purge, the obvious purge from the campaign. But there's a little bit that goes on in every transition. But in Donald Trump's case, it happened all through the campaign. Remember his presidential campaign, there was always a succession of people running the campaign. There'd be a development, and that person would be pushed out. So this is the way. This is probably going to be the way it is in the Trump presidency as well. I think we'll continue to see these kinds of things going throughout his term.
Got to end it there. We're out of time. Sure. Guys, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.